This section is focusing on setting compassionate boundaries, both with ourselves and our colleagues. In order to be able to set those boundaries, we first have to think about what kind of behaviors contributes to our well-being and the mission of our organization. So to do that, we're going to do a little bit of an activity. Just like the drivers of fatigue, we're going to have you head up to the flip chart on either side of us, and I really want you to think about what actions, what behaviors feel helpful to your well-being rather than any kind of mindset or thought process. So for example, if being a trustworthy person is what you deem as a healthy behavior for an adult to have, what's the behavior that's associated with being a trustworthy person? That might be honest and open communication. So really focusing on the action part. Once we have those generated, those are going to be what we call our yeses, the things we want to prioritize in our life because they're of value to us and they feed our mission. Once we have those, we can start to look at what are we going to say no to? What things are we going to have to set some boundaries around to uphold those yeses? Does that make sense? So the first thing we're going to do is focus on those yeses. Whenever you feel ready to do it, head on up to those boards and start writing out some of those healthy behaviors that you want to see from yourself and your colleagues. Thanks everyone for brainstorming our healthy adult behaviors list here. Our next step in this process, after we've identified our yeses, is to decide what kind of boundaries or what things do we need to say no to keep these yeses as our priorities. So we're going to work together here in a group and just generate a list of the things we're going to say no to support those yeses. An example of this might be, really, when you look at any of these healthy adult behaviors, in order for me to acknowledge my coworkers, show up and be present, I know I need to get a good night's sleep beforehand. So my no to support any of these yeses is staying up late the night before. My boundary is to go to bed at a decent hour so that any of these healthy behaviors can happen. Does anyone have thoughts right off the top of their head of a no that you might need to implement in order to keep either these behaviors generally in mind or one specifically?
For me, I would say in order for me to be able to greet my students in the hallway, I would have to say no to meetings that go past the first bell.
Sure. Clear yes and clear no. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I think to fulfill my priorities as a teacher, my yes is to say no to extra duties that get in the way.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. So in order to keep what's important to you as a teacher and educator at the top of your mind, sometimes we'll have to say no to those extra duties, even if they seem enticing to you. Yeah. Yeah, Karen.
So in order to set and communicate clear boundaries with myself and each other, I would have to say no to working nonstop throughout the day, throughout the workday.
Thank you, Karen. Now that we've come up with our yeses and our nos, we can start thinking about how we're going to actually set some of those boundaries. Sometimes that can feel uncomfortable, so we have some tips to offer you to think about as you move forward in setting some of those boundaries.
So you should have a handout there in front of you that has tips for setting compassionate boundaries, and I'm just going to take a moment to walk us through those tips. The first one we've already done. That first one is knowing what we want to say yes to in our life. This could be specific behaviors like we just generated, or even values or priorities, things that are really important to you. Once we're able to identify those things, it's easier then for us to figure out what are the things in our life, like these, that we need to say no to in order to best support those yeses. Our next tip is being proactive, having meetings to discuss boundaries, because structure often offers safety for both sides. So really just simply letting people know that we would like to discuss a boundary of ours with them. This could also give that other person a chance to say, you know what, right now is not the best time. Can we connect at a later time? And a lot of times just being able to say, like, hey, can I talk with you about a boundary, provides people the opportunity to get themselves kind of in that headspace. Our third tip is just say it. Don't make them guess. Use simple and direct language. When we're ready to talk with somebody about a boundary that we have or that we're looking to set, we want to do our best to be as clear and concise as possible. Our fourth tip is reinforced by pointing out the violations in the moment. So when someone violates a boundary of yours, which is bound to happen, us as humans, we make mistakes. It takes us a while to also learn what each other's boundaries are and to be able to practice them. So when there is a violation, we just take a moment to point it out in a compassionate way. It gives that other person an opportunity to really see our boundary in action. Our fifth tip is to give explanations that are specific, relevant to the other person, and offered shared solutions. So if I'm getting ready to share an explanation of a boundary of mine, I may give an explanation that's specific perhaps for an 8-year-old student that I'm working with. That may be a different explanation than perhaps my supervisor. So I just want to make sure whatever explanation I'm giving in relation to my boundary makes sense for the person that I'm talking with. And then if I would really like some support in maintaining a boundary and perhaps I need some additional suggestions, I can engage somebody in thinking about what would be some possible ways, some possible solutions in meeting that boundary. Not only do I get some new ideas, but that person will probably be more likely to support me in meeting that boundary and remember it because they were part of the planning process. And then our last tip, we want to back up your boundary with action. If you give in, you invite people to ignore your needs. We truly teach other people how to treat us. And every time we give in to a boundary we've set, we are communicating that it's okay for our boundary to not be honored. Some examples of what it looks like to set a boundary that really takes in mind our yeses when we're saying no to something. My first example is, let's say that you're interacting with somebody who's really escalated and very angry. Perhaps they're yelling at you or using what you would deem to be pretty aggressive behaviors or language. You may respond with, I want to work with you to figure this out. It'll be hard if our brains are not calm enough to think. How about we take a 5-minute break? So my yes, I really want to work with you on this. Also my yes, I need us to have a calm interaction in order for me to be able to work with you on this. So my no is, I'm not going to continue to engage in this conversation until we both have calmed down. All right, we'll do another one. This one kind of takes in that shared solution piece as part of tip number 5, and it's saying no to extra commitments in the workplace. Although our district goals are really important to me, I need to discuss what can come off my plate or what I can do in a different manner in order to take on anything new. I'm working on how to balance my family's needs and my workload. Lots of yeses on that one. District goals are really important to me. Me being an effective worker is important to me, and my family is important. And I'm having a hard time finding balance and reaching all 3 of those yeses, so I'm asking perhaps my supervisor for some of their thoughts on what I need to say no to or how I need to do things differently in order to meet those 3 yeses. There's 2 different examples of ways you can use your yeses to best support things you need to say no to. I'm going to have Hannah walk us through an exercise next.
Because we know that setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable for some people or difficult for some people, we want to give you a chance to practice setting those boundaries. So you're simply going to pair up or turn to your small group and just practice what it might sound like to set a boundary about a value or a yes you would like to uphold. So we'll just have a couple here, and then a group of 3 over here. And we'll come back and maybe take a couple share outs. Do you have anyone willing to share their example of the boundary they practiced in their group? Go ahead, Allison.
Yeah, I make my best decisions when I've had time to think about them. And so instead of making decisions in the moment, I could ask that and just say, I need a day to think about it, I need some more time, and then think it through and get back to the person or my colleague.
Sure. So your yes is that you want to be able to work through whatever process with this person. And your no is an immediate answer, so you have time to think. Great. Thanks, Allison. How about one more share out?
I have a share out. I have a coworker who, when we encounter one another, she tends to complain a lot, and it makes me very uncomfortable and is sort of draining to my energy. So to develop a boundary around that, I'm going to tell her just let her know how I'm feeling. I come in the morning and I'm really want to be energized for my students and give my all and do my best. And when I found that when I, hear a lot of things that I don't have control over, I don't want to engage in that conversation because it tends to bring me down and makes it harder for me to keep my energy up for the students, which is the priority. So I would then ask if we can maybe talk about it another time. Let's change the topic for now. We're in this school environment. Let's get each other pumped up and then talk about it another time outside of the environment.
Yeah, I'm hearing 2 yeses. 1, I want to be my best teacher for my student. And 2, I want to support you and hear you out. But in order to do both of those things effectively, I have to say no to this conversation right in this moment. Right. Thanks, Sharon. So to tie up these pieces, I'd like to share a Brene Brown quote with you. I invite you to close your eyes, put your head down, just really listen to the quote and take it in. Probably going to read it through it twice, just as a heads up here. So Brene Brown says, "Compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment." That's compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. After taking a moment to reflect there on the connection between boundaries and resentment, is anyone willing to share a boundary that they either need to instate a little bit stronger or continue to uphold to keep them out of that place of resentment? Yeah, Jaleesa.
One boundary that I would that I would keep on hold is to be able not to listen to gossip, and be able to say no when it's gonna start happening.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that, Jaleesa. Is there anyone else who'd be willing to share a boundary with us today?
I have one. I think I need to definitely commit to not answering emails after hours and extra calls from parents and whatnot, and making sure that I'm keeping my work hours.
Yeah. Helps you be a better teacher when you are supposed to be teaching. Great. Thanks, Jessica. To close this activity out, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to do one final piece.
Thanks, Hannah. Before I ask our closing question, again, I'm just going to give us a chance to pause and reconnect with ourselves. So if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes. Just relax your body a bit. And just take a moment to reconnect with your breath. Now I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask you to reflect on it. I'll give an answer, my personal answer to the question, and then I'll pass our talking piece around the circle again. As always, you always have the right to pass as it comes to you. So our closing question is, what is one of your yeses that strongly connects with your personal sense of purpose? One of my yeses that connects to my personal sense of purpose is my desire to be present for my daughter, particularly in her evening hours as we spend a lot of time apart during the work day or school day. So my yes is being home for her bedtime routine, so that I can be there to connect with her.
Thank you. One of my yeses is the acknowledgement of each other and my coworkers' work, because that's important to me, because it's important to know that it's a shared mission, it's a shared goal, and all of us are able to reach it together.
Thanks, Karen.
I think to make sure each day that there's some time set aside for mindfulness of varying styles and degrees, whether it's listening to music, going for a run, so that I'm all the more present for my family and friends or whoever I interact with.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you, everyone, for sharing on that closing question and really throughout our activity today. Really appreciate your participation. We're closing out our time together talking about our compassionate boundaries, and you'll see particularly our brainstorm around our healthy behaviors is going to come up again when we talk about staff culture in our next section. So thank you again for your participation, and I look forward to talking more with you soon.